Hi, I'm Eunika and I paint with clay. This is a painting I'm working on currently. It's a portrait of Alexandra, who contacted me a month ago or so to collaborate with her. She wanted to feature my process of how I actually paint with clay. And this is a portrait of her. And so the way I start is I sketch it out first, and I kind of make these spaces where different clays are going to go and just kind of go from there. And the reason I'm creating these sort of, they're kind of reminiscent of a topo map kind of lines, is because some of these clays don't blend well together, and when I blend them they have a water line, so I have to keep it very wet and blend them very carefully so there's not this kind of like a watermark. So another reason why I have to map out my painting is because when the clay is wet, and this is the area I'm going to start working on today, when the clay is wet, it actually looks like it's the same color. And this one is a bit lighter, but for instance, yesterday I was working on this area over here, and you can kind of see it was all wet and looked black basically. And I'm gonna have to go in and just kind of make some of these areas a little darker. These are gonna be folds in the sheet. So that's kind of how I'm working these out. And the same thing with the body, with the portrait and the body of Alexandra. So one of the main questions that people have about my work is, what does it mean that I paint with clay? Most people associate clay with pottery and ceramics, and truth be told, that is where this whole process started. I got my master's in ceramics, and this is one of the examples of my work that I used to do. This was my thesis, and one of the components of my thesis was that I would go into the field and collect clay and then bring it back to the studio and build these sort of simple shapes and pit fire them. And so even though I graduated with three-dimensional body of work, I was already collecting clays for my painter's palette. And then after graduation, I would just add to the palette. I would travel around the United States, Canada, and Europe and collect my clays. All kinds of different clays, different textures, different colors. I'm mostly looking at color because it's sort of like a missing link in my painter's palette. I don't get the blues, I don't get the greens, I don't get the pinks and purples, but I get a very large variety of very earthy colors. So with that said, I don't buy my clay, I actually go and dig it up. And I travel around with a Ziploc bag and a little shovel and extract it. And I also don't buy any pigments. I do not accept clays from people. I consider finding the clay as part of my painting process. I like going into the field and finding it, extracting it, taking it back to the studio and prepping it to be a painting medium, so it actually has a story. And so the painting in itself has a story as well. So over the years I have found some very interesting places to dig up my clay. I dug up clay around the gold mines of Colorado. I dug up clays from the vineyards of Italy, such as Brunello, and I have clay from Slovakia, my homeland country. And so as I'm working on this project, I am going to be sharing some of these stories behind the clays. So right now I'm painting with Bay Onyx. It's my darkest clay, and I dug it up in San Francisco, California, and I wasn't looking for clay. I just happened to be on the beach and just like everybody else admiring the beach, and then I noticed a runoff, and just over the years of collecting different clays, I know what clay looks like from a distance. I know kind of the conditions that it can be found in, and so I ran over to check it out, and it was clay. And because I was completely unprepared, I had nothing on me, so I just grabbed a handful and took it home with me to test it out. So right now I am painting with wine. I've been painting with wine for a couple years now. I discovered the process just by accident, and it was after a party with a bunch of empty wine glasses that I just saw and thought I would try out. The wine I'm painting with is from Sutcliffe. It's a Sutcliffe Cabernet Sauvignon, and I use lots of different wines. In fact, this weekend we're having a wine festival here in Telluride, and I've been asked to come and paint with wine, so I'm going to be painting with several different kinds of wines. And so what makes my wine paintings different from others, because some other people do use wine in their paintings, is that I mix it with clay or I incorporate it into clay. In this case, I'm kind of using it as a color and also as a value kind of paint. So the clay I am painting with right now is called Greenwood Dawn, and it comes from Mississippi. And what's special about this clay is that it's one of the very first clays I dug up. It's located in Greenwood, Mississippi, which is a small town. It's right where the bluffs of Mississippi meet the Mississippi Delta, and it faces west. So I just remember digging this clay up and just seeing the most incredible Mississippi sunsets from the bluffs. And what also makes this clay very special is that this was my very first clay digging experience. I was taken to this location by my former professor in undergrad, who actually became my mentor, and she showed me this clay, and we dug up bags and bags of it and tried to do something with it, but it's so sticky. A lot of locals in Mississippi hate this clay, absolutely hate it, because you cannot grow anything in it, and because it is so sticky. And so when I went to graduate school, I tried to do something with this. I tried to kind of break this clay into something, and I just could not do anything with it. Everything I built with it was blowing up in a kiln, and I eventually got an F. I failed a semester because I had nothing to show for it. But something good came out of it. I discovered that this clay actually has a lot of pigment and a lot of painting potential, and that is how my painting with clay actually started. I started experimenting with this clay and mixing it with others, and not only did I start painting with it, but a lot of my thesis was actually made with Greenwood Dawn. This clay is called Boreal Dusk. It's a clay I dug up in Ottawa, Canada. And what makes this clay interesting is that it's called Leda clay, and Leda clay is glacial-marine kind of clay, also known as quick clay, and it can be quite catastrophic, and it has been quite catastrophic for that region. It's known to liquefy spontaneously, and when it receives a lot of moisture, it just creates sinkholes and landslides. So it's kind of a deadly clay, but I really like it because it's my gray clay. It's probably the only true gray clay I actually have. and it's also from Canada, where I'm actually a citizen of. My parents live there. I'm not from there. My parents just moved there and raised me there. So it has a special connection, you know, to my theme as far as where my clays come from. This clay is called Sneezeweed Gold. It reminds me of gold nuggets, which is actually not far from the truth. I found this clay when I was driving across the Red Mountain Pass, which is actually one of the sites that has a gold mine. And I found it by chance. I saw a yellow runoff and I followed the runoff to the source, and I found this yellow liquid coming from a gold mine from the top. And it was falling into this kind of like a natural tub. And so when I scooped it up, it was very souffle-like. It was nothing like this hard chunk of clay. It was great consistency. I took it home and it turned out to be one of my favorite clays. It's very silky, smooth, really fun to work with. And the reason why I called it Sneezeweed Gold is because it has a very bright yellow color, and it's the exact same color as sneezeweed, which is one of the Colorado wildflowers that grows here in the summertime, and it covers meadows and fields. It's part of the daisy family, and just like the flower, this clay is very bright and shiny, and I love painting with it. The clay I am painting with right now I named Čachtická paní. It's clay from Slovakia. It's where I'm from. And Čachtická paní means the Lady of Čachtice. Čachtice is a castle. It's actually a castle going right now in Carpathian Mountains. And Lady of Čachtice, also known as Elizabeth Bartoli, she was a serial killer. She was a well-known serial killer, and she was known for her bloodlust that wiped out a population of young girls because she thought that bathing in their blood would preserve her youth and ultimately make her immortal. The clay, even though it looks kind of brownish when it's wet, it actually dries very pale in color, and hence the name, Čachtická paní. This is Faulkner Summer. It's a very light yellow clay that I dug up behind William Faulkner's house in Mississippi. What's interesting about the house, it's kind of yellow, actually light yellow, very reminiscent of the color. Makes me think they actually painted it with the clay it actually sits on. This clay is located in Oxford, Mississippi, which is part of the Mississippi Hills where I get a lot of my clays. And this is one of my favorites. This is almost oil-like. It's very smooth, silky, and it's a nice blend between the Greenwood Dawn, which is the orange clay, and the white clay, which I'm going to tell you about next, which I also found in Mississippi. Last but not least, this is Cotton Silver. Just like the previous clay I was telling you about, the Faulkner Summer, this clay is kind of like a sister clay for the Faulkner Summer. It's very smooth, almost hardly any sand or particles in it, and it's white. It's white as chalk, actually. And I call them sister clays. It's because not only were they found near each other, they have the same consistency, and the Faulkner Summer actually contains a little bit of this white. What's what I like about this is how I actually got it. I also got it in Oxford, Mississippi, and it was not at a fancy place like the Faulkner's house. It was just down the road, and it was found in a gravel pit, and there were some workers working on it. And I was just walking around, and I saw a bunch of different small little pieces of clay. And then I was just picking them up, and it was just, even though it was a pit, it was this kind of mythical setting because there were all these swallows flying around, and I have a little thing for the swallows. They do build their birds from dirt, which is kind of symbolic because that's kind of what I do, what I'm doing here. And I saw this little chip, and it turned out to be this giant block of clay. And there's a video on it that was shot by a former student of mine, and you can find it on my website, how I actually found this big, huge chunk of white clay. And this is the final clay, and just kind of putting the final touches on this painting. And my next and last video is going to be the actual painting and what it actually looks like finished.